Hi, everybody. Welcome to the longest, shortest time and WNYC's Google Hangout on making mealtime happier with your children. The longest, shortest time is supported by Ella's Kitchen. It's dedicated to providing big tastes for tiny taste buds and making good food fun. Learn more about their organic baby and toddler food ranges at ellaskitchen.com. I am joined today, I'm Hillary Frank, I host The Longest Shortest Time. I'm joined today by Dan Pashman. He's the host of the Sporkful podcast, also here at WNYC. And if you heard our last episode, you'll know Dan as the guy who likes to eat graham crackers that have been gummed by his one-year-old child. You can find Dan's podcast and videos on how to eat stuff at sporkful.com. Hi, Dan.
Hey.
I'm also joined by Heidi Kecskemethy, who has been working with children and families as a registered dietitian specializing in pediatric nutrition for over 20 years. She is an expert reviewer for kidshealth.org. She works as a researcher at Nemours AI DuPont Hospital for Children and is also a dietitian at the HMS School for Children with Cerebral Palsy. You might also recognize Heidi's last name, Kecskemethy, because I did a whole series called the I've Got News series. You can find that at our website at longestshortesttime.com if you just search for I've Got News. The whole series was about Heidi's surprise pregnancy. I talked to her husband about it, and also her daughter's subsequent surprise pregnancy. I just wanted to tell you about Heidi. I first met Heidi, I used to work with her husband Tom, and I met her at this holiday party at their house, and she served up this delicious chocolate cake. It was so decadent, and I was hugely pregnant. I was like ready to go any day, and I took this like small piece of chocolate cake because I knew that Heidi was a pediatric dietitian, and I didn't want to seem like I was being like not nutritious with my fetus, and so Heidi like forced me to take more cake. She was like, "That's not enough cake for you. Take more cake." And then she printed up the recipe for me, and I took it home, and it was like just ridden with corn syrup. And I thought like Heidi is the kind of dietitian that I want to know. So welcome, Heidi.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So on the topic of desserts, I thought we'd start off with desserts. Dan, what is the unhealthiest thing you have fed your children? You have two young children.
That's right. I have Becky. She's 3.5, and Emily is 1. And I mean, there's certainly been a couple of days where Becky ate, just in terms of quantity, an unhealthy number of desserts, ice cream and cake and such. But when I hear the word unhealthy, I think about my kids. The first thing I think about, and this I can credit to my wife, really, Lucky Charms. My wife loves Lucky Charms, and I feel like the marshmallows in Lucky Charms are so gross. But my wife likes having it, and she's got my daughter hooked on it. My daughter calls them marsh pillows instead of marshmallows, and she just asked for marshmallow cereal, marshmallows, and it's disturbing, but. Yeah, I try to like sneak a few Cheerios in there, make it a little less bad, but not always.
So Heidi, same question. What is the unhealthiest thing you've fed to one of your children? Your children are grown now, but so what's the unhealthiest thing you've fed them, and also how much unhealthiness is okay?
Well, probably that chocolate cake that I fed you might be the unhealthiest thing, but you know, I can think of many things that a lot of people would call unhealthy, but moderation is really the key. That's why I serve chocolate cake, even ridden with corn syrup. And maybe I foisted a second piece on you, but it's important to have a variety of foods, and some healthier, some unhealthy, and then balance it all works out. So that's kind of my philosophy as a dietitian. I do want to exert here, if you don't mind me mentioning, while I do work for 2 different employers, the opinions that I present are my own and not those of my employers. I need to say that, so thanks.
Right. And also, if you are seeking help, nutritional help for a problem, of course, you'll need to see somebody in person. But we're going to try to cover a variety of issues that we solicited questions from the audience, and you guys wrote in a lot of great questions, and there were some themes that we noticed, so we're going to try to hit most of the big themes. So just to go back to the graham cracker thing, because Dan and I have been having it out on this probably too much over whether a dry graham cracker versus a graham cracker that has been gummed by your baby is more delicious. And I am on the dry graham cracker side. Heidi, which one do you prefer?
Well, there's a scientific reason, Dan, and I should have mentioned this the other day when we were talking. There's actually a reason, probably, that your experiment didn't work with Hillary, and that is your saliva, your spit, has amylase in it, salivary amylases, which actually breaks down complex carbohydrates into dextrins, which are actually sweeter tasting. So your experiment didn't work with Hillary because it, in fact, did not include saliva. So while you're texture averse to the mushy graham cracker, Hillary, probably Dan's experience with the mangled graham cracker was actually slightly sweeter than what you experienced. Now, personally, I have anecdotally noticed that saliva, if it's on food, can be more tolerated than in drink. So if you're sharing a straw with your little kid who's just learning to drink and you've got floaters in that straw, my question is, will you drink it? To either of you, Dan, Hillary?
This is a big problem in my household because my 1-year-old is in this phase where she especially wants whatever beverage. If it's in a big grown-up size breakable glass, she wants it. And you're going to hold it up to her mouth and kind of pour it down, and half of it runs down her shirt, and half of the food that's in her mouth ends up back in the water. And my wife is like, my wife ends up every day dehydrated because she can't drink any water. Because every time she takes out a glass of water, it ends up with like half my daughter's meal floating inside it. So I think you're right that is grosser. There's just something about the grossness of seeing all the cloudy water. It's not a happy sight.
Yeah, that's definitely grosser to me. I mean, my daughter, she wants to she would dunk everything in milk if she could, and I stop her sometimes. But part of me is like, oh, she's just experimenting. But like I draw a line sometimes, and I'm just like, I know you're not going to drink your milk if all of your dinner goes in there. So, yeah.
Right. Well, I should mention I have a book coming out called Eat More Better, and there's a technique that I discuss in the book that I've come up with called the sidecar. And if you like to dunk cookies or donuts or whatever into coffee or milk, I recommend you have a big glass to drink from, and then like a little espresso cup or a teacup that has more coffee or milk, and then that's for the dunking, and the big cup is for the drinking. So you keep them sequestered.
That's a great idea.
So I want to move on to picky eaters. Most of the questions we got were about picky eaters in one way or another, whether it's about vegetables or fiber or even like sensory issues. So here's a question for you, Heidi. Can all children be made less picky?
Well, that's a hard one to answer. There's no doubt that exposure to a wide variety of foods very early on makes kids more likely to accept different foods and different fruits and vegetables and just ethnic and cultural foods, that sort of thing. The pickiness factor can be complicated because some kids are very texture sensitive, some people are color and temperature sensitive, some people it varies what the issue is around the pickiness. But there's one thing that is absolutely clear, and that is if you're a picky eater as a parent and you eat around your child, the child will learn those behaviors. So the contrary, the opposite is true as well. The inverse is true, which is even if you are yourself a picky eater, if you don't let that show necessarily and you offer a huge variety of foods and even serve them to yourself on your plate and maybe take a taste and don't wince or make a face at the same time, your child is more likely to accept greater numbers of varieties of food and things like that, even later on.
What are your feelings about tricking children, like hiding healthy food within unhealthy food?
Well, that's interesting. In case you can't tell, and you already stated it, I'm a pretty moderate when it comes to nutrition. I'm not the food police. I don't like to be viewed as that with my friends and family, and people know that about me. But I do like, I don't like the extremes of just hide it all, grind it up, and throw it into the whatever sauce or whatever and pretend it's not there. But I also don't think making a big issue out of every single food and nutrient that you're presenting is appropriate either. So what I would say is if you're, it depends on your child too, because there are other issues, sensory issues with certain types of medical conditions like autism and things like that, where you have to use some trickery to get some foods in. But if we're talking about the typical child, having a conversation, and if they take part, now not young children, but toddlers, if they take part in the food preparation and see you cooking, or at least interested in discussing what's in your food, if you're not a cook yourself, there's no reason to hide things. So I'm not a big fan of, to answer your question, I'm not a big fan of tricking and pretending things aren't the way they are, because that's not going to serve them well later in life. Who's going to trick them when they're 30? And all they eat is one thing. That's not going to work, so it's not functional. But at the same time, not dealing with it, like trying to not deal with it and just say it's easier to just shove it all in and grind it all up and put it in, whatever, we'll deal with it later, kicking the can down the road, is really not a great idea either. So
what about, like, a lot of parents will say, my kid will only eat noodles. Like, that's it. They'll only eat noodles and cheese. What do you say to, I mean, like, I'm not that parent. I don't know what it's like to be with them all the time. Is that true? Is there anything they can do?
Yeah, there is. And you know what? I had one of those kids. I had not my one daughter who you're aware of, but the other one was on a serious food jag for a long time, and macaroni and cheese was her thing. Now, I like to cook, and so does my husband, so I'm lucky that way. So ours at least was homemade macaroni and cheese, but nonetheless, it was still macaroni and cheese. But and she's still a noodle head. But offer a variety of types of noodles. Offer the multicolored noodles. The tomato-based, the beet-based, the spinach-based pasta, the different colors. So at least it introduces different colors, different flavors. Get flavored pasta, the basil and lemon pasta, and things like that. Change it up and try to expand the palette in that way. And shapes, different spirals and noodles and curls and straight and whatever, all these different shapes that you can do. So you can change it up a lot. And you can also change it up a lot with what sauces you put on it or accompany with it. Now, your child might only want Parmesan cheese, butter, and pasta or margarine on their noodles, but you can also still have some other things on the side. You can do red sauces, white sauces, Alfredo, whatever. You can change things up slowly and introduce them that way. It's important, though, that you do offer other things around that food. So having a favorite food is great. It's okay, but continue to offer the other things around it.
Dan, have your kids gotten stuck on any kinds of foods?
I think I'm probably relatively fortunate that way. My kids certainly have their favorites. I mean, my daughter loves hot dogs. She loves mac and cheese. I mean, if you say the words mac and cheese, like anytime after 3 p.m., you're stuck serving that for dinner because there's no escape. It's never gotten that bad. They're pretty adventurous. For me, what I always try to do, and I'm not an expert on this, so I don't know that my kids are both good eaters. I don't know that this is the reason why they're good eaters. Maybe it's just genetic. I love to eat. Maybe they got that from me. But with both my daughters, when they're in that phase, like 6 months to a year, when they just kind of are so excited to eat what you're eating, whatever it is, they just want what mom and dad have. I always fed my kids right off my plate, like make them feel like they're getting something special off my plate, whatever it is. My kids were eating Texas brisket the other night. When we had sushi, my daughter wanted sushi. She wants to have what we have, so I ordered an avocado roll. And she got used to eating sushi. Now she eats sushi with raw tuna in it. So I think while your kids are still young and they're in that I want whatever mom and dad are having phase, just try to get them used to eating. Give them anything they can swallow. It's going to expand their palate and get them used to eating things.
Yeah, one of my best techniques has been to not offer something to my daughter Sasha and to eat it myself, and then she'll ask me for it. Then she really craves it, and maybe she'll try it. Maybe it's like she likes the bean sprouts. Maybe she doesn't like she doesn't like raw spinach. She likes cooked spinach. Like she'll find out if she likes it, but she will ask for it, demand it if I am having it, and it was not offered to her. Heidi, what happens like if your kid just doesn't eat vegetables? What's the outcome?
Well, it's probably not going to be the end of the world. I mean, there are many adults and even elderly people who never ate a vegetable in their life, and they certainly live to be quite old. It does limit what a person can have, as they go through life. So vegetables have a lot of good properties. Obviously, they have lots of vitamins and minerals depending on what type of vegetable, and they have fiber, and they're not generally particularly too high in calories unless they're starchy. But so they serve a really important purpose. But if your child never ever touched a vegetable, it doesn't mean that they're gonna fail to thrive or not succeed in life or become the next president or whatever they're gonna do. It's not the end of the world, but it is a nice thing, and it's an important thing. It's not just a nice thing, but it's actually a very important thing that people learn children learn to have a variety of foods so that they can ensure that they don't need to take a supplement later because there's a whole piece of the food group that's out of their diet. So it just allows good intake of a variety of fruits and vegetables and healthy foods it ensures that you take in enough vitamins and minerals to support good growth.
I want to talk specifically about babies now. So Dan, you have one child who's still a baby, and your other is a toddler. Did you at all use the baby-led weaning technique?
Can you remind me what that is?
This is very hot right now, and actually I had to look it up. I didn't know what it was but my understanding of it is that around 6 months you wait for your kid to show signs of wanting to eat table food, and so you skip like the rice cereals and the purees, and you let them kind of show you when they're ready to start incorporating food, like real food, into their life.
I mean, I guess my answer is yes and no. We started giving our kids solids, even like our pediatrician had said 4 months. We started with both of them a little before 4 months because we just felt like they were constantly hungry. And they were showing, and I think part of it, as I recall, probably was they were showing an interest in the food that we were eating, even at that relatively young age. And so we did start with the rice cereal and the oatmeal and the pureed fruit, pureed vegetables, and then eventually they graduated to solid food. So I guess we sort of did half of that. We did the part about waiting, doing it when they seemed to indicate they were ready, but we didn't do the part about skipping ahead straight to solids.
Yeah, and your whole thing on your podcast and in your book is about eating and like the joy of eating and presentation of food and combinations of food. Did you do anything to consciously to make food more appealing to your kids in terms of how it was presented or how it looked on your plate?
I don't know about presenting, but I did definitely make an effort to include my daughter and make an effort to include them in cooking when I cook. I don't know for sure that that's made a difference, but I think that it's just a fun activity with your kids, and I think it's made my daughter sort of more interested in food, and she, stands up on the chair and cuts vegetables with me and nibbles on the vegetables while she's cutting them. She started eating the peppers we were getting ready to cook, and she said, "Can I eat these?" And I said, "Well," we have to cut them into smaller pieces, and then we'll cook them, and then you can eat them." And she said, "Maybe I can eat them into smaller pieces." And I said, "All right, that was cute enough that you can keep eating them." But so I kind of like approach Hillary of like not making a deal of it. Like my daughter loves raw peppers, so I'm just like, hey, it's snack time. How about some raw peppers? Here you go. Great. Like I don't make it, like I try not to put vegetables in this separate category and just make them seem like any other food. And I think that helps. But I would also just like to say briefly, like, if there are parents out there, kids are driving crazy because they won't eat anything, I know you're desperate for a solution, and maybe the solution's out there, but you should also consider the possibility that there's not that much that you can do. Like, there are some things you can do, and Heidi's more of an expert on this than I am, but it's also possible that your kid is just a picky eater, just like some grown-ups are picky eaters, and you shouldn't necessarily think it's your fault.
Heidi, I saw you nodding on that. Is it true some people are just picky eaters? It's not necessarily a power struggle thing?
Yeah, I think that's true. The more power struggle, the greater the chance of being a picky eater, as a matter of fact. So I agree 100% with Dan. Don't make it a big deal. It's I happen to be in the same camp as Dan. I enjoy eating good food. I like good quality food. We like preparing food, and our daughters are raised that way as well. And we don't have particularly picky eaters. But at the same time, some people just have a texture thing. Like the one daughter who was into macaroni and cheese was also one, and is still one now, who if there's certain textures, she's not there. She used to retch if she tried to eat a piece of meat, because if it had any tendon or anything chewy in it, it would be terrible, even as a kid. And of course now she's vegetarian because it's a texture thing, and that's fine. But I agree with Dan. Sometimes they're just going to be picky, but there is no doubt that if you're a picky eater as yourself as a parent, you can contribute and pass that nice, or not nice thing along to your kids, depending on how you look at it.
And so, Heidi, what about the weaning thing? Skipping rice cereals and purees. What's your point of view on that?
I don't disagree with child-led or baby-led weaning. Readiness to eat and readiness to be fed is clearly dictated by the developmental appropriateness of the child. So the ability to sit up and hold your head up, the ability to not have your tongue stick out all the time, a tongue protrusion reflex that is an infant reflex. When that goes away, kids are ready to start to have oral feeds of solid foods. Solid food, though, is puree. Like, food is food. The texture is, something we're talking about right now. But when we're talking about introducing solids to babies, it means either liquid, breast milk or formula, or other stuff. And the other stuff includes pureed textures and chopped and chunky and solid. Like, they're all solids in some form or another as far as when you're talking about it for children. Now, there's no doubt, and I know this from working with numerous speech therapists and feeding specialists for children with disabilities and atypical, not your typical kid, when the safest thing to feed somebody who's learning to orally eat is a puree. A mixed texture is more difficult to manage. If you think about how you move things around in your mouth, and you don't even think about how you lateralize, meaning moving things from one side of the mouth to the other, and what your tongue does with all that, and how it moves the bolus of food back into your mouth to swallow. This is all learned stuff that happens during infancy and early childhood when you're teaching your kids to eat and when you give them foods. So if you have a mixed texture food, it's much more complex in the mouth to manage and handle. And then if you have really mixed texture things like a super thin liquid with chunks in it, like a soup with hard chunks of potato or bean in it, that's an entirely different thing that presents totally different safety challenges for somebody who does not yet have that skill, who's very immature. So I am a big fan, to answer your question. Absolutely, it's appropriate to start with purees. There'd be no reason not to. It's all food. It's just smoother with a higher liquid content than something that isn't as smooth and isn't as blended. So purees are an absolutely appropriate start to somebody who has never eaten food before.
How about rice cereal nutritionally? Is it important to get those kinds of iron fortified cereals in your kids?
Yeah, I mean the rice cereals, because they are iron fortified. We know that babies and young children, and even into toddlerhood, have a tendency to have a low iron. So it's important to find an iron source. Now, is there real magic with baby cereals? The fact that they're so thin and pureed makes them really easy. Just stir in some formula or breast milk or juice or whatever you're going to use, something with nutrition in it, and then they're easy to go. Now, if you want to take the time to make cream of wheat, for example, or farina or something like that, which is also really high in iron, that's appropriate as well. It's just baby cereals are very, very easy to do. Now, they used to always say do rice first because it's the least allergenic. Rice is one of the least allergenic foods out there. But now with the arsenic scare and rice and all that sort of thing, there's a million other things to worry about there. I think which cereal to start with is less important, but you know, the cereals do have an important role from an iron standpoint.
You brought up allergies, Dan. Have you had much? Have you encountered kids with food allergies much?
I mean, my niece is allergic to honey and to peanuts, and so you know, we're at their house, it's an issue, and it's hard because my nephew, her brother, he's one of these kids that doesn't eat anything besides bread and chocolate. They were over at my house, and I had this chocolate peanut butter, and my sister-in-law was so excited because she was like, he'll actually eat this, and it has peanut butter in it, so it actually has like fat, and I mean, he's skinny as a rail, like he has fat in it. I can fatten him up with this. Then she was upset. She's like, but I can't bring it home because I can't have peanut butter in my house because my daughter is allergic to it. So, I mean, I'm lucky that my kids don't have that, but my niece and nephew definitely deal with that. You know, and you know, Heidi was talking about kids have like a gag reflex with textures. That's what my nephew is like. I mean, he looks at a food that he doesn't like the texture of and like could practically throw up just from seeing it. It's funny because I grew up allergic to like dogs, cats. I'm still allergic to dogs, cats, grass, trees, ragweed, pollen, dust, mildew, like basically the outdoors and half of the indoors. But thankfully, I'm not allergic to any foods.
So here's a question for you, Dan. You're throwing a birthday party, and you know there are going to be some kids at the party with allergies. What do you do to make the food, you know, edible to them?
I mean, you know, fortunately, at least you know, in cities, there are more sort of bakeries that I think that are accommodating to those things. There are obviously a lot of great bloggers and recipes out there that are nut-free, dairy-free, vegan, etc. There's actually a lot of great vegan baking. I mean, I'm not the most vegan kind of guy you're going to find, but I've had a lot of good vegan brownies and cupcakes in my day. And that obviously eliminates a lot of the potential allergens like eggs, butter, nuts. Well, not nuts, but you can make it without nuts. But I also, I don't know, maybe you've had a different, I'm curious if you've had a different experience, Hillary. I feel like oftentimes, like, when a kid is exceptional in some way, it's more the parent that feels bad, and the kid has kind of always been that way and doesn't know it any different. You know, like we have, like my sister-in-law has family that are like super observant kosher. So when they come to one of the birthday parties, they get their own meal wrapped in plastic. The kids get their own meals wrapped in plastic, their own separate cupcakes wrapped in plastic from a special kosher place, because that's how they eat. And the kids don't seem fazed by it, you know. Maybe when they get a little older they will. I don't know. Maybe you feel differently.
Yeah, I don't know. I actually haven't really encountered it too much, except for like you know, certain, like at camp, I can't send my daughter to school with like peanut butter or anything with nuts. But she gets special treatment because she has eczema, and so when she comes out of the swimming pool, she gets a shower, and no one else gets a shower. And I've wondered if like she feels like weird about that, but I think she feels special. I don't know. She explains, I have eczema. But yeah, I don't know. This one I don't have too much personal experience on it. But Heidi, I wonder, a lot of people were saying that like some of the alternatives for foods that have allergens are not yummy. Do you have suggestions on how to make food that for kids who are allergic to, say, dairy or gluten more yummy?
Well, yeah. Luckily, now there are so many more options, especially for the gluten issue, because so many people seem to be more aware of it, and there are so many more options. There are some really good online resources. The Food Allergy and Anaphylaxis Network has a whole bunch of recipes that are tested by parents and shared with parents. There are Oh golly, there's so many online forums and stuff now that you can find decent recipes. I think one thing though, Dan brings up a really great point, which is I think it's more an issue to the parents, and the more food invested the parent is, the bigger deal it is. I mean, the birthday party is the birthday party. It's not the cake. The birthday is a celebration of the birthday, and you can have it activity centered. And the food, while food is always important to everybody, and it's very important to me, doesn't have to be the focus necessarily. It's ancillary to the fun of the birthday. Now, if somebody decides to make it about the cake, which is certainly acceptable as well, then either have another cake and ask two different cakes that are allergen free or whatever, and make that available. And generally speaking, there's so many food allergies now. These kids, even in preschool, they'll school you as a parent. Oh, well, Johnny can't have blah 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 because he's allergic, and it might surprise you. I think the kids are very savvy, and hopefully they're being raised to be savvy by their parents so that they can take care of themselves functionally later.
So we've got a lot of vegetarian families now. Dan, do you feel like there's such a thing as too many fruits and vegetables on the other side of the spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to. I mean, Heidi can answer it better in terms of the actual nutrition of it. It's hard for me to believe, especially if you're talking about fruits and vegetables. I don't understand. It's like, look, you could drive yourself crazy if you're gonna do enough research to find out why every single food, when eaten in an extreme, could possibly somehow be bad for you. So you have to kind of pick and choose. Like, I'd much rather my kids eat, 10 bananas and 10 apples in a day than, a pile of chocolate, or even worse, like some sort of hyper-processed junk food. So yeah, I'm pretty much never going to tell my kids they can't have maybe fruit, not because it's unhealthy, but only because, insane amounts of fruit can give them like a stomach ache. That's the only reason I would talk them out of too much fruit. But beyond that, like, as much as they want.
So Heidi, some of the vegetarian families were writing in and saying they were concerned with their kids not gaining enough weight. Is that a real concern? Same question to you. Is there such a thing as too much fruits and vegetables? How do you balance that out?
Well, it can be a concern. It depends on what kind of vegetarian they are. If they're vegan vegetarians, it can be extremely challenging to get enough nutrition, calories, protein, fat, and as well as vitamins and minerals to support growth in a very young child. And it can be difficult because most of those foods are, while they're nutrient dense in some ways, they're filling. They're very filling, and they can't take enough volume in to meet their needs for particularly protein if they're vegan. And I'm not picking on the vegans. I'm a fan of all kinds of vegetarianism. It just means you need to be really, really planful and careful to know what you're doing. And again, it depends on how strongly you feel about certain things. Sometimes folks who are vegan, there's certain nutrients that are of concern, like vitamin B12, and sometimes which comes from often animal sources, not always, but they sometimes will inadvertently miss certain key nutrients as part of the diet that are critical for young children. So I would say if they're vegan vegetarians, that they need to be very careful and planful about it, and have a discussion with somebody knowledgeable about vegetarian nutrition. Generally, there are many dietitians who can help plan that sort of diet with their kids. And if there are other types of vegetarians, if they do eat eggs and cheese and dairy, it shouldn't be that hard to get all those nutrients in. And certainly, if you're just eliminating red meat or things with a face and that sort of thing, it depends on what kind of vegetarianism. So, but the best indicator of adequacy in general for a growing child is growth, height and weight, tracked over time through their pediatrician, and there are things that you can do to just boost calories, whether it's adding a little extra butter or margarine or cream cheese, or be sure to use full-fat dairy if they use dairy products to get those extra calories in. There's certainly things that you can do for children. that can help with that. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder also about amounts. Dan, do you ever find yourself thinking that your kids are eating too much?
Yeah, once in a while. I mean, I know that early on with a little kid, my pediatrician basically said, you can't overfeed the kid. And I found that to be true. I mean, I think that our little kid will stop eating. Once in a while, like if it's one of my daughter's favorite foods, like I feel like she might eat hot dogs to infinity. Like if we just kept putting hot dogs in front of her, she would never stop. And, I don't want her to eat. She's 3.5. She should not eat 4 hot dogs in a sitting. Like she's not Kobayashi here. But for most of the time, like they'll stop when they're full. If anything, now with my older daughter, it's always the challenge of like she wants to go play. It's not even that she's a picky eater. She'll eat what's on the plate, but she wants to go play. She just doesn't want to sit the amount of time that it takes for her to eat, and then she comes back an hour later and she says she's hungry. So usually then I'll just say, okay, like you can have a carrot or an apple, like no, I'm not going to give her, if she leaves the dinner table early, she knows like I'm not going to give her ice cream then. But she likes to snack on a carrot, so it works out okay.
Heidi, what about you on the amount? Some parents seem worried that their kids are eating too much of something, or that they will start snacking and then leave the table, and then at that point, do you enforce that this is mealtime, or do you kind of let them pick and choose when they're going to eat their stuff?
Well, having meal times is really helpful, and having set meal times and set snack times set within, it's not like it's set ironclad that at X hour we have snack or whatever, but having meal times that are reliable is important to kids. Food insecurity exists when it's kind of a free-for-all in a house, and it's like, we'll eat, it could be 3 o'clock, 10 o'clock, whatever. Food insecurity yields overeating in children. It yields overeating in adults as well. It's important to have meal times and to say it's time for dinner now or lunch or whatever you want to call it. And there is sort of a guideline that I like to use, which is if your child is cruising around looking for something to eat because it's nearly dinner time and they're looking for something, within an hour before or after, it's not time to have something before the meal. It's gonna ruin the appetite and so forth. That's just a general guideline. And again, there's no point in setting a timer or anything like that. But just as a guideline, if they're starving, starving Marvin is like 10 minutes before it's time to eat, and you're making this nice meal, and they're wanting to reach in and eat a bunch of stuff, that they're not going to have much room left for dinner because of the timing of that. So that's just a general guideline. Now, for younger children, snacks are really important. So, a child's stomach is only so big, and you can only fit so much in there. And if they have frequent food exposures, they will actually probably eat less. Kids are marvelously adept at self-regulating intake. As adults, we start to, lose that ability because we get too distracted by other things and we're not paying attention. We just scarf food down, and also now we're really stuffed, or we skip breakfast and then don't eat till later and eat a whole bunch because we're starving. But kids will, and it's been shown in the literature and research, that kids will self-regulate beautifully. So if they have fewer meals, they will eat more, and if they have more frequent meals, they will probably eat a little bit less. So that's what the research shows.
So Dan, I'm gonna. You are not an expert in what I'm about to ask you, but I'm gonna ask you anyway. Let's say we got a kid who is 5 years old and is really deep into the power struggle with his parents over food. It's like, Mom, I'm only eating peanut butter. I will not eat unless it's peanut butter. And the mom is desperate to break out of this cycle. What do you suggest?
Well, I mean, 5, I feel like if your kid's 5 years old and you're in that kind of thing, it's like, I feel like you gotta try to break down those habits when they're still a little more malleable. But 5 is still pretty young. I mean, in general, I feel like, I try to avoid the head-on collision. Like, there's so much negotiating with your kids. It's a constant negotiation. I always say that, like I swear, like, little kids would be they're better lawyers than half the lawyers out there. They're like, well, you said I couldn't touch that, but I'm not touching it. I'm only 0.01 centimeters away from it, And so I think that you want to avoid the situation where it's like your kid's saying yes and you're saying no, and it's just yes, no, because then it's just like this arm wrestling match, and the only way you can win then is just to basically just crush your kid and be like, no, I'm starving you, I'm going to lock you to the radiator, and you're never going to eat again unless you do what I say, and that's not the best scenario to be in, I think that anytime you can find a way to kind of just turn the conversation a little bit so that it isn't just me versus you, yes, no, this thing. If it can, I'm struggling to think of a perfect example of doing that, but sort of try to just change the topic a little bit or come at it in a different way. I'm sure that a parent who's in that situation has been trying incentives, trying punishments. It's tough, I don't know that I have a perfect situation, but I just say try to avoid the yes no thing.
So Heidi, you initially, when I started talking to you about food and kids, you recommended this book to me by Ellen Satter, How to Get Your Kids to Eat But Not Too Much, then the whole idea that you have a job and your kid has a job, and your job is to pick the foods that are being served and what time they're being served, and the kid's job is to decide how much they're going to eat and if at all. Is there a point at which it's too late to use that technique because they're so dug in?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's not. I think if your child is old enough that you can have a conversation with them about it. So that might be the too late time. They're old enough, they're rational, they understand, and you establish the house rules. And as parents, we sometimes change our rules. You don't know when your child's 6 months old what you're going to do when they're 12. You just don't. And it's a process that changes over time and depends on what's going on. So it's fair that you would think of food and eating in that same way. So if your child goes onto a JAG and becomes demanding and insisting on the peanut butter sandwich only or else, then you let them do their else. They're going to get hungry. It's no different than the other rule and limit testing that happens with children. So to simply state the ground rules. Look, we provide you with healthy foods. There's a variety of foods here. We make sure you've got the food. It's your job to eat it. And if you choose not to eat it, that's on you, and you're going to be hungry. But it does mean, though, that you're not also going to get up from the table and go rustle around in the cupboards and get other stuff. So
we've got a question coming in now from somebody who works with an autistic child. Works with a 3-year-old who has no preferred foods. He likes chocolate, bananas, and spicy chips. Tried chocolate syrup on bananas and on rice, and chocolate chip muffins. Won't try any of it. Do you have any ideas?
Oh, boy, it depends on the child. That one's a hard one for me to answer without knowing more about the child.
Sorry, I forgot one part of it. His mom force feeds him.
Okay. Well, again, autism is, and that's a spectrum, so it depends on the child. There are some kids that just won't eat to their own detriment, and they would practically shrivel up and blow away, or fail to thrive. And when you get into the more severe end of the autism spectrum, the behaviors and all the issues around it are so complex. It's multifaceted, and it takes a team of people to figure out how to address behaviors and how to deal with very specific things like food JAG or very food specificity, like this young child is exhibiting. There are different schools of thought about how to deal with kids that are not able or not willing to eat by mouth. There are several inpatient centers around the country where they have intensive feeding programs, and again, there are different schools of thought. Some of them do a reward-based system. Some of it actually requires almost force feeding. But we're not talking about the typical child that many folks, hopefully, who are viewing this today are dealing with. We're talking about medical needs of a child with particular medical issues. And there are different philosophies out there. The fact that mom force feeds this child may or may not be appropriate. Again, I can't answer that without knowing the situation and the child and what she's been taught. If she came through one of these feeding programs where that was what was done, this is the tools that this mother was armed with. So I don't fault the mother. I'm not saying it's appropriate to force feed your child either. It depends on the situation. It's a little bit more complex than we can, I think, address in this venue.
Got it. So, Dan, I want to come back to you. We did a lot of talking on our podcasts about parents and eating, how your eating changes when you become a parent. Parents, especially new parents, are tired. We're tired. We need lots of energy. Dan, what do you do to boost your energy through food other than coffee?
So coffee, yeah, that's you took the first word out of my mouth. It gets really tough, and I mean I've certainly resorted to some pretty extreme measures. I actually had to, I had the second pass of my book. I had to basically finish writing my book in the 3 months after our second child was born, and so clearly I was not getting much sleep, and I really needed. It's not like I was rolling out of bed and just sort of like go punch the clock. I needed my brain to really be functional and actually hopefully creative. And I even resorted to 5-hour energy, which, is not one of my proudest moments, but it helped me finish my book. And I mean, it does have 8,333% of the recommended daily allowance of vitamin B12. So it's got that going for it. But beyond that, I think, I know that if you're a new parent, the idea of finding even the time or the energy to exercise may seem like a distant hope, but as much as you can, exercise. Exercise gives you energy. And, now that our second child's a little bit older, my wife has started jogging more, and she's felt so much better just going out for short runs and walks, just being outside, getting exercise. It has given her more energy. So I think exercise, yeah. And then I know that's not a food, Hillary, sorry. But
yeah, I know. And you are not an exercise expert. I am only asking you about food, Dan Pashman.
Yeah.
Heidi,
well, if this thing showed me that.
Can you one up Dan in the food department? Can you tell us is there anything nutritionally we can do other than coffee to boost our energy?
I'm going to sound like a broken record. Eat a variety of foods. If you resort to things like sugar and caffeine, as we just talked about, there's an increase in energy and then a crash and burn phase. And if you're cycling through the bump in energy and then crash and burn, bump in energy, crash and burn, which is actually what's happening when you catch little snippets of sleep anyway, when you're a first-time new parent or even second or third-time parent, but have a baby who's up all the time, it's really difficult. I think what is important is that you take care of yourself and you try to do the best that you can. Whether you're scarfing off the plates, over the sink and leaning in and doing it to take time to try to nourish yourself, or whether you when people say they want to help, ask them to bring a salad. Ask them to bring something that might be a little more labor-intensive to make. Even just washing lettuce can be labor-intensive when it comes to new babies and lack of sleep. So one of my favorite gifts that I received as a new parent was a big giant fruit basket, and I always give that still because it was so it was just so nice. It wasn't the bread or the cake or lasagna. That was all nice too, but just having a variety of foods available. I did actually look this up though, Dan, because when you and Hillary had your last session on your podcast, Dan, and also here at LST, I did just for fun look it up, and there was a recent paper published in March of this year, 2014, looking exactly at the comparison of dietary intakes of parents, first-time, second-time parents, and non-parents. And people are actually interested in this. Now, they didn't quantify how much are they eating off of the plates, but they did look at some of the differences, and it was sort of interesting, and I had to chuckle when I read that first time, and this is one of the first studies that actually looked at not just mother's intake, but father's intake. But, and this was a group, it was published in the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. But anyway, one of the interesting finding was that the first-time mothers ate more sugar and fat than second-time mothers and non-mothers. The first-time fathers ate more starch, and that made me think of the graham crackers, Dan. But anyway, they ate more starch, and then by the time you had another child, both things seemed to normalize, and people ate more meat and other, more variety in general, better nutrition by the time they had a second child. So, but what is important is that across all the boards, the mothers really did not meet their nutritional needs. Whether they're first time, second time, or especially first time, second time parents, they did not meet their nutritional needs.
Dan, what's your guilty pleasure new parent food?
Ooh, it's almost definitely gonna have melted cheese on top, whatever it is. Like when I'm like feeling tired and sad and lonely, I crave melted. Like it's usually gonna be like a grilled sandwich with meat and cheese. I'm gonna put butter on it. I'm gonna get some fresh bread at the bakery. I'm gonna slice nice big slices like this. I'm gonna put a lot of butter in the pan. I'm gonna grill that. I'm gonna melt the cheese in there. I'm gonna put some meat in there, and it is going to be decadent.
And do you do like I've done and nosh on your kids' snack food?
You love the animal crackers. I don't love animal crackers, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of competition in my house for the lox, the smoked salmon. My daughter loves smoked salmon.
That's not a kid food. That's not a kid food.
That's expensive. Like I'm not, look, that's not. I don't want my kid to be too spoiled here. At age 3.5, I'm gonna cut her off with like a quarter pound of lox. Okay, it's like $8 for a quarter pound. I got like $30 worth of lox in the house. And that's like treasure right there. And then she eats hers, and then I put it, and then I go to sit down with mine after I just said, okay, no more lox. Then I sit down with a bagel with lox, and she's like, well, what's that, Daddy? And then I have to go and hide it. I have to go like eat my bagel and lox like in the bathroom. Embarrassing.
Yeah, but do you eat the cheddar bunnies?
I have eaten some cheddar bunnies. But hey, Hillary, have you ever eaten Cheerios out of the car seat?
I have not. No, I haven't.
What? What are you eating? And I mean, this is like that's like classic, right?
Yeah.
Cheerios out of the car seat. They get warm and toasty. They have a nice special crisp.
Heidi, what about you? What's your guilty pleasure parent food?
Oh, geez. Well, I don't know. This could be a grand confessional. I said recently if I had to pick 2 foods left on the earth, and this is all I would have, it would actually be watermelon and potato chips. So, yeah, I'm a salty, fat, and sweets eater. Oftentimes people categorize what kind of foods they like. Either they're sweets eaters or salty and fatty. I don't like fats. I would not go with the excess of butter and margarine in the pan. I don't like whipped cream and that sort of thing. But potato chips, I'm all there. So it depends on the combinations of things. So
do you put salt on your watermelon?
No, I don't actually. But I did grow up doing that. But I don't do that.
What about did you?
I was just gonna ask that. You should make a sandwich, Heidi. Take 2 thin slices of watermelon and put a potato chip in the middle, and it'll rock your world. I promise you that.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
Heidi, did you used to sneak your kids' snack foods? I imagine they were slightly different when your kids were little. Did you used to eat your kids' snack foods?
Well, you know what? I didn't feed my kids anything I wouldn't eat myself. So I'm a pretty adventuresome eater. So foods, I'm not picky that way. So if I, obviously I wouldn't give my 11-month-old potato chips, not because they're potato chips and they're too salty for that age, but because they're sharp and jaggy, and she'll probably choke on them. So if I was eating some, I'm not a big one to hide what I'm eating. So I don't, yeah. I ate whatever they ate, so, or they ate what I ate, put it that way.
So I guess no caviar in Heidi's house.
Yeah, we eat caviar too. The kids have eaten. My kids have eaten escargot, and they'll eat whatever. So
Nice.
yeah.
Well, it's looking like it's time for us to wrap up. Dan, what's your takeaway? What do you want parents to know about making mealtime happier?
I think if there's one general point we've heard here in several different ways, it's that what you eat as a parent affects what your kids will eat. If you eat healthy, your kids are more likely to eat healthy as a grown-up. If you have a wide range of foods on your plate that you're sharing with them, it will broaden their palate. So just go forth and eat, and let that joy, deliciousness radiate down to your children.
And eat things out of their mouths and their car seats.
Yeah, hey, if it tastes good, baby, do it.
And Heidi, what about you? What's your one takeaway for how to make mealtime happier?
I would build on what Dan said. If you've got food issues, they can be translated easily to your kids. So be aware of what your triggers are for yourself as a parent. Be open, be inclusive. If you make it a big deal, pick your battles. It's classic parenthood. Pick your battles. Remember the roles of your job's to provide food. Their job's to eat it. If you can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink. So pick your battles carefully.
Well, thanks to you both for participating in this Google Hangout. It's been great having you. Thanks also to Joanna Solotaroff, my excellent associate producer, who's been working behind the scenes on this very diligently. Thanks also to Ella's Kitchen, who supported this Hangout, and to WNYC for helping me host it. A few notes here. You should sign up for our Facebook groups. We've got one for moms and one for dads. You can find them at facebook.com/groups/longest-shortest-mamas or longest-shortest-papas, depending on which group is your group. We've got just amazing, non-judgy parenting conversations going on in there. They're funny, they're informative. Join up. You can subscribe to our podcast, The Longest Shortest Time, in iTunes. We've got more Google Hangouts coming up. Our next one is going to be on pelvic floor healing. That will be very, very interesting. That's coming up in the fall. We're going to be doing a live speed dating event in Brooklyn in the fall as well. This Hangout itself is going to be a YouTube video. As soon as we hang up, it's going to be a shareable link. I'm sure you parents have friends who can find information in this Hangout useful, so please share it with your friends. You can find us at longestshortesttime.com. You can find Dan at sporkful.com. Thanks so much to everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, thanks.